I hadn't heard it in a long time. So, but when Llewellyn and we're gonna have to get on to them back there. Butch, Butch, you're gonna have to separate them back there. Y'all got to separate them. See, they're not even paying attention. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Are y'all through? Okay. Okay, I have to remember when I was coaching Little League, we always had one kid that had to talk. So I said, okay, he wants to talk, so let's let him talk and get him out of the system. And had one though, I said, that usually shut him up, but he then had one. Okay, he started talking, Mm. Yep, that's right. Okay, we better get started. I've told this story before, so y'all can continue talking. Y'all probably heard it. So. You haven't, okay. When I were at First Baptist in Early, I think Linda knows where Early is. They're next to Brownwood, yeah. Yeah, you drive out Early into Brownwood. They're right there together. But years prior to that original church, it had burned and everything was lost, with the exception of the bell. Now, when the new church was built, they said there was not enough. The steeple wasn't built big enough to place the bell in it, so it was put into storage. Now, it was brought up in a business meeting that the bell needed to be displayed. I think somebody just run across it and they forgot about it, and they said, we need to display this. Well, this was fine, but the discussion or argument began. Where to put it? Some wanted to put it in front of the church. Some may have wanted to build a steeple and put it, another one large enough to house the bell. But it didn't make any difference really to me, and since Llewellyn and I were not longtime members, and I didn't care. In fact, I didn't even know we had a bell until that came up. But I was beginning to wonder if the church was going to split on where to put the bell. I mean, the argument, and we've had things like that. You've probably experienced something, maybe the color of the carpet, and this and that. What? The bricks out there on the wall. Yes, yes. But the members finally agreed to place the bell in an open area between the sanctuary and the educational building. Now, whether it's still there or not, I don't know. We went back there for a funeral several years ago, and they built a new sanctuary, so I don't know if the bell was still there or not. It's the same place, and I didn't notice if they'd built a steeple big enough for the bell. But anyway, in other words, another thing. Well, who's going to ring it? And so I guess the only church I remember here at First Baptist here in Carpus Cove, in the original church, they had a bell, and it was in the steeple. And I don't know where it's at now, if it's still there, if it's even still there. I know there was bats up in there where they, where they had the bell. What? In the belfry, yes. And they would nosedive you too when you were out there. But anyway, enough of that. But after Pisidia and Antioch, Paul and Barnabas made 3 additional stops on their first missionary journey. Now, in each city, new believers came among the Jews, the Gentile proselytes. That was those who had converted to Judaism, and then the other Gentiles. But many Gentiles were especially interested in Paul's message because the gospel was available for all who would believe in Jesus. Remember, that was really the start of the gospel going to the Gentiles. When we talk about Peter, he went to Cornelius, and that was the start there. But Paul, that was his calling, really, his mission. or commissioned to do was take the message to the Gentiles, or whoever would listen. Often problems could be traced to the Jews who did not believe the gospel. They rejected the message, but they weren't content to leave the situation alone. Because they didn't like it, they didn't want anybody else to like it. In other words, but Jewish leaders actively sought allies in opposing Paul and Barnabas. Nothing's changed today. Nothing. Wherever it may be, religion, church policy, one time or another, someone's going to be against it. I'm against it. I was always one in school. I was a devil's advocate, and I would take up whatever the class was for. I'd just take up the other side, just for the sake of argument, I guess, nothing else. But and I know Dana kind of got that from me too. She said when they'd have a class meeting in the class, that some of them would bring something up, then they would look at her and see if it was okay, So, but usually if it was something major, there would be someone, like I said, who would try to stir the people against it. Not long ago at a local Baptist church here, a faction come up to get rid of the pastor. And it was based on some past incidents against this pastor that they had resurfaced and re-brought him up and tried to use that to get rid of him. And I actually talked to the pastor and said before the church called him, he was open about his past. He didn't hide anything and was open about it, and he said the members were okay with it. And so anyway, nothing happened. These people left the church. But they left. But now we're getting into our lesson, our Sunday school lesson this morning, and there's several verses I feel like we need to cover prior to that. But we'll read our lesson text. And someone read Acts 14:11 through 13.
Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul, or Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest Zeus, whose temple was just outside the town, brought bulls and wreaths to the gates because he intended for the crowds to offer sacrifice.
You remember last week's lesson, Paul and Barnabas had preached the gospel, and many of the Gentiles gladly accepted the word of God. But some had incited women and men of the city against Paul and Barnabas. Now they shook off the dust of their feet and journeyed to Iconium. Now there they entered the synagogue. Normally when they went into a city, they would enter the synagogue, and there Paul would preach. And they entered the synagogue and spoke, in which a large number of people believed, both Jews and Gentiles. But the people of the city were divided. Sounds familiar again, doesn't it? Some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. It went so far as there was intent to stone them. Being aware of it, they fled the cities of Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and the surrounding region. Now, while preaching in Lystra, the city was the home, remember that was the home of Lois and Eunice and Timothy's grandmother and mother in 2 Timothy 1:5. Paul noticed a man that had been lame from birth. With a loud voice, now I don't think Paul was bringing attention to himself. Maybe he was out in the crowd and there was some noise. I don't know why. He said he spoke with a loud voice. I don't think it was to bring attention to himself. But he told him I think it was for everyone to hear and for this lame man to be able to hear. But he told the crippled man to stand up, and immediately he sprang to his feet. Imagine the scene. I mean, this man, he's been crippled from birth. We don't know what the deformity or whatever he may have had, but he was crippled, and Peter pointed him out and said, stand up. Have you ever gotten in trouble or in a mess by doing something good? Paul was doing something good. We're going to see he got in trouble or in a mess. Or trying to help someone. We've probably all been there and probably helping someone or something. Why did I ever get involved? Why did I help them? It seems, but verse 11 of our text, when the crowd saw what happened, they just knew Paul and Barnabas were gods. The crowd spoke in a language unfamiliar to Paul and Barnabas. It said the gods have become like men and become down to us. you know, it's strange, you know. Said, but said, you know, they claim Paul and it was with Hermes and Barnabas Zeus, I think, and then King James. It's another. I forget what they call him, but someone is some of the lesson. Do you have the King? What does it say? What does it say in your quarterly? What the? Yeah, verse 12. Hermes. Yeah. Curious. Yeah, okay. It depends on your translation. It's the same, but they called him Hermes and Zeus. We'll go with that for now. But traditionally, the two gods would visit Lystra incognito, asking for food and lodging. Now, I can't picture this. Here comes these strangers into town. I'm Zeus and he's Hermes, and we want some food and lodging. I mean, how ridiculous can that sound? But I'm sure all of us have been in a situation where people around or near you were speaking in a language unfamiliar. Okay, okay, there we go. Good, good. But we've all been, especially here in a multicultural area, that we hear other languages spoken. Sometimes, you know, we don't understand what they're saying. Uh, I wish I'd learned more, you know, working out in especially West Texas around a bunch of Hispanics. I could listen close enough to know what they were talking about. Didn't really understand, but I could pick up enough to know what they're talking about. But sometimes I wondered if they was talking about me. I think or they say, okay, let's gang up on him when when he gets out of the store and we'll jump him. You know, yeah, shoot the gringo. Yeah. But you know, I hadn't done it in a long time. But being the mischievous person I am, at times when a couple were talking to each other and maybe they'd laugh, I'd just laugh with them, and they'd look at me like, you know what we're talking about? Didn't have a clue, but you know, we've all been there. You know, especially you know in the military. I've gone into parts of the world and everything, and in other languages. Maybe you pick up enough to maybe know what they're talking about. Maybe hopefully you'll have someone that translates for you. I know there's a phone now. I guess they've had them. That's one of them flip phones. You know, yeah, it's a translator. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Like I said, I had an uncle he was Swede, um, but he went to Sweden, and he said, and he could. I don't know why. Of course, I'm sure the dialect's different and everything, but he could speak the Sweden language here. He grew up around him, but he said as soon as he got on the bus, he'd say, "Anybody here speak English?" So, but anyway, he made it all right. But I know there's sometimes we try to maybe stumble our way through speaking to someone in another language, and they look at you and said, you know, and speak English back to you. Yes.
Interesting things is you go into a German store or anything, you know, they're all
Right.
Deutsch. And you say, do you speak English? Nine, pull out a dollar bill. Oh, what do you want?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the universal language there. Yeah. 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 And that's true. A lot of it's true. I noticed, you know, a lot of them work construction. Uh, Maybe they didn't speak English, but they understood payday and quitting time. Yeah, they caught on to that right quick. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Yes, that's true. But it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it was really fun to so they can catch up on what we're saying, how we're saying.
Mm-hmm. Well,
When you're in conversation.
oh yeah. Well, I remember Rose's nephew saying, it was German. He said their meetings were in English, and a lot of yeah. Hmm. Yeah. I'm afraid it's rapidly fading. It's the dollar's still the universal currency, but I don't know for how long. Hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yes. Yeah, but anyway, we like I said, and we're like I said, we're in a multicultural area right here because of Fort Hood, uh, Fort Hood. Yes, but and we've like I said, we've it used to make me mad, but I've just come accustomed to it now. I mean, I'm thinking if we went to a foreign country and it's just us two, would we be speaking English or would we be trying to speak the language of that country? Well, yeah, but so really, you reverse it, and yeah, mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I know it. That's right. Yeah, yeah. But like I said, Carp School was founded mainly by Germans. I mean, it was a German community, and my mother's mother was German. But during World War I, I believe it was World War I, there were German sympathizers here. They sent money back to Germany, and mother said she didn't learn any German enough to speak up because her mother would not allow German to be spoken in her home because she didn't want anybody to think she was a German sympathizer. And so she didn't allow it. But of course, I grew up with people. When the families got together, they spoke German, and I had a good friend I went to school with. He spoke fluent German. But yeah, yeah, yeah. But I've told that story. We're going to tell this one right quick. My freshman year, the first day of school, here come this kid walking up to me with his schedule. I finally figured out his schedule. He couldn't speak a word of English. He was German, and uh, I finally figured out he was trying to ask where to go, where the classroom. But I said by the time he graduated, he could outcuss anybody in school. He could, he learned the language. He learned both languages, English and profanity. Yeah. So let's go and ask someone read verses 14 through 18.
But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, Men, why are you doing these things?
Oh, that's it. Okay.
No,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I
also
thought.
are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own way. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, and that he did good, gave us rain from heaven in fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitude from the sacrifices to them.
Even though Paul didn't understand their speech, he figured things out. Like sometimes we can figure things out. Paul said, in other words, we got a problem. Houston, we got a problem. Yeah. They were wanting to make sacrifices to us. The apostles, Paul and Barnabas, tore their robes and rushed into the crowd, shouting and waving their hands. Whoa, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You're confused. Tearing their clothes was a sign of mourning. It can have be several meanings. It could be a sign of mourning, expression of horror and revulsion at blasphemy or deep grief. I believe this instance it was a sign of horror. That Paul said, oh, wait a minute, we tore our clothes. And in verse 15, Paul is probably pleading in desperation. Why are you doing these things? We're humans just like you. We are humble men, as our only desire is to preach the gospel, that you can turn from these idols to the living God. I believe we can learn a lesson from Paul here. We must be very careful not to put a pastor, a teacher, evangelist on a pedestal. I've heard people say, well, my pastor said this, and no one knows the Bible better than him. Tony Evans is the greatest. I like David Jeremiah, but he is human. Evans and Jeremiah and Jeffries are all great men of God, but they give the glory to God. And there are those, and sadly, that say, look at me. If you have any questions concerning the Bible or spirituality, you come to me first. I've heard that said. You don't need to go searching the Bible. Just come to me and ask me. I've got all the answers. And we talk to see some of these evangelists, but it brings attention to them. They come out with this coiffured hair and all these robes and all this stuff, and saying bringing all the attention to them. But we have to be careful. And we say, well, these people like these evangelists and everything. To me, that's pretty evident, especially among us. But it can happen in our local churches. I've seen it. Where there's the pastor, maybe in a subtle way, has control has the control of the members, control of the church. I've heard it. I've listened to them. They may be what they're preaching is really nothing out of the way, ordinary, but they still have that control over all the members. And everything, and don't misunderstand me, everything is centered around the church. And there's not a life outside the church. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, we are a group of believers in each other, and we are to assemble and come together. But and like I said, I have to be careful of saying this, but there is a life outside the church, and that we must live. But like I said, I've seen it and heard it that there are churches and pastors that everything revolves around the church. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. It happened right here. In fact, I never did really get the whole story, but before we moved back, but they had their first pastor that he left, and they had an interim, and they asked him to call him as their pastor. He left. Took half the church with, I think there were 6 left after, and they just built this auditorium, and yeah, when y'all saved the church. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. And like I said, I've seen it, and I think it can go so far as that pastor or teacher or someone in the church is right below Jesus. I mean, as far as there's the Trinity, and then there's that pastor or that teacher, but it is. We have to be careful. Oh yeah, yeah. He's got a grip on the people. Right. Yes. And what's sad, the people don't realize it. Yeah, that he's got a grip on them. And but like I said, we've got it, and it can be so subtle. It can be, and that the people don't even realize it. Sure. Oh yes. Yes. Right. And but instead of proclaiming God, but Paul knew they were unfamiliar with the Old Testament. This is another thing that Paul learned, and we need to learn too. Know who you're talking to. That's good. Paul picked up on that, I think, right quick. Paul knew they were unfamiliar with the Old Testament, and he adjusted his message. Instead of proclaiming the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he appealed to the universal and rational knowledge of the one who created the world. If you were preaching in the Caribbean islands, you wouldn't use illustrations of snow in Wisconsin because they'd never seen snow. in reverse. But I remember when, and I, like I said, and I think this is a lesson that all of us, not just our pastors or preachers, teachers, but remember who we're talking to. And
I think it's really important because as our society and culture have changed,
sure.
the presuppositions have changed.
Oh yeah.
If we go on with presuppositions that were true,
Yeah.
they're not anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point there. And here too, if we're speaking with someone that has no knowledge of the Bible, we don't take them back to the Old Testament and bring them through Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, Jacob. But remember, I always thought about, it reminds me of another story. I remember when Frank Gifford and Howard Cosell and Don Meredith were the commentators on Monday night. I still say they were the best. But Cosell made a comment we talking about these mile-long words. Meredith stopped him and called him Howie. Called him Howie, speak English. Majority of the viewers are common, ordinary, working people, and they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And that's so true. He'd use these big, long words and everything. Like I said, most of the listeners didn't understand a word he was saying. And like I said, Meredith was just a common folk. But I always remember he said, speak English. And called him Howie. Gifford was kind of the one that kept them apart, He was the mediator. But Paul called the Restream crowd to consider the real God, the one who stands behind all creations, not one of the lesser or imaginary Greek gods. The things Paul mentions in Acts 14:17 says he did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness, were just the kind of things these people would think that Zeus gave them. Paul told them these blessings come from the true God who lives in heaven, not from Zeus. God's kindness to all men in giving rain and fruitful crops should be seen as a witness of his love and power, something theologians sometimes call common grace. He appealed to natural revelation, to the things that even a pagan could understand by looking at the world around them. But even with all this, Paul and Barnabas had an extremely difficult time challenging the wrong conceptions of God held by the Restreamians. So I'm going to read now verses 19 through 20.
Some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, and when they won over the crowd, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. After the disciples gathered around him, he got up and went into town. The next day he left with Barnabas for Derbe.
The cities of Antioch and Iconium were earlier stops on Paul and Barnabas' missionary journey. In Pisidian Antioch, they had been welcomed initially before jealous Jews opposed them over Gentile salvation. In Iconium, a group of Jews again opposed them. They escaped the city before the crowd was able to follow through on threats to stone him. Now the people of Lystra anticipated blessings and gifts for the men they declared him as gods. Now when Paul and Barnabas declared they were but humans as the crowd was offended. How dare you? In other words, this lame man walked, and you declared him healed, and you just say you're a human just like us. They were offended. These are some of the most amazing verses to me in the Bible. Evidently, these Jews from Antioch and Iconium had followed Paul and Barnabas, stirring up people everywhere they went. Having convinced the people that Paul and Barnabas were probably false prophets and were probably not really gods of Hermes and Zeus, then they stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, assuming he was dead. To me, these verses, like I said, are some of the most amazing in the New Testament. You ever been hit by a rock? I have. Yeah. Hitting. What? Yeah. And I don't know if it was intentional but it hurt. Got hit. Yeah. I can't imagine being hit multiple times by rocks to the point of being unconscious or killed. Yeah, it'd be a horrible death, wouldn't it? And the perpetrators felt sure Paul was dead, or they wouldn't have left him and drug him out of the city. As he had to be unconscious, or maybe he was dead. As the disciples stood around him, probably said, "Now what are we going to do? What are we going to do with Paul's body?" And all of a sudden, he simply gets up, dusts himself off, and came back in the city. Don't you imagine they were shocked? Yeah. Yeah. Said the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. Luke does not indicate if Paul was dead and God brought him back to life or God miraculously healed him. I'm assuming there's no broken bones, no internal injuries. If there were, God healed them. Either way, God was not finished with Paul. He had more work for him to do. And like I said, I look back and just think of the shock. Being stoned to death, that probably wasn't a place on his body that he hadn't been hit by a rock. And you imagine it kind of came to mind when Paul held the coats of the ones that stoned. You think he thought of that? Probably knew what it felt like. Yes. But like I said, God was not through with him, his ministry. He still had a ministry. Yes, that's when he went to the third heaven. Could have been when he went to the third heaven. But he still had plans for Paul. Has there ever been a time when you or your family member walked away from a wreck or and with just a scratch or minor bruises? Yes, we've probably. What about when the car come through the building, Chris? No one was really seriously injured. Not bad. Yes, it could have been a lot more serious. But yes, I know. Yes, God still had plans for everyone. I still remember the guy he panicked. I think just put the gas on the floorboard and just burning rubber. And I think Hattie reached in there and turned the keys off and he turned them back on. Yeah. Oh yes. Words. Yes. It can be bad. Yeah. No, she didn't have a fracture. Yeah. 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 But anyway, can you imagine now that after Paul got okay and everything, after, like I said, he probably that may have crossed his mind when they stoned Stephen. But can you imagine returning to the city that had been stoned? Yeah. I thought, Paul, are you thinking straight? It was no longer safe for Paul and Barnabas, so the next day they moved to the next cities. Someone read now verses 21 through 23. Derby was about 60 miles southwest of Lystra. They preached the gospel, which they enjoyed great success and many converts. Unlike previous cities, they faced no recorded opposition or resistance. I don't want them to stay. Maybe the opposing Jews did not follow them there, but you know, we have missionaries that are serving in dangerous locations. And it has got so bad, the mission board have moved them out due to their lives were in danger. But here we see Paul and Barnabas going right back into the fire. They were simply following the leadership of the Holy Spirit. Now, I would have questioned it. Are you sure you want me to go back? You remember I was stoned and left for dead. No matter where the scripture may lead us, there may be difficult times and obstacles. Relations, and this, I think this is a great point by one of the writers here. No matter where the Spirit may lead us, and there may be difficult times and obstacles, relationships have been built with new believers who needed their encouragement and leadership. In other words, Paul met, there was people in Lystra that had come to Christ, and they needed the encouragement and leadership that Paul could give them and the other disciples. A primary mission of Paul and Barnabas in returning to these cities was to assure the churches of their love and God's continued care for them. You know, anywhere we may have gone, even how good or how bad it may be, we developed in there some good relationships with people there, and made friends, and sometimes we go off and leave them. And this was Paul's calling, to go back and minister to these people, even though there was a danger there. There were those that needed his leadership and encouragement. But the apostles spent time encouraging them to continue in the faith. The apostles also provided some practical aid to the churches. They lacked leadership to provide spiritual guidance. They ordained elders to teach and protect the congregations. The young and the tender churches needed insights of the apostles to choose men who could provide strong leadership in a pagan culture. The missionaries followed the same pattern of prayer and fasting as in Syrian Antioch in Acts 13, 2 and 3. Paul and Barnabas then had to get back home, but they were leaving the new believers in the hands of God. I think we see, even how dangerous it may have been. We see the calling and urging for Paul and Barnabas to return to Lystra because there was still a need there. The church needed to grow. They were young. They needed their guidance and their leadership and to grow in the Spirit. When God felt this was completed, that he led Paul and Barnabas back to their home. Any comment? What? Yeah. Sure. Yes. 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 And we need leadership. We need encouragement. We need sometimes a mentor, not one that that will in the right way teach us and bring us along and encourage us. Encourage us to stay in the Word. Encourage us to be active and come, but not one that says, "Okay, you got questions, you just bring it to me." Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. It's what we need to hear. Sure. Exactly. Oh yeah. 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 And I have to keep reminding myself to stay humble. And I appreciate the compliments and don't stop. but I have to remind myself. I mean, to stay humble. And I pray that God keep me humble. Don't give me the big head where I can't get out the door. It's a big. Oh yeah, yeah, God will do that. Yes, yes.
When I was born, there wasn't an anchor bed.
Mm-hmm.
There's two daughters.
Yep.
And I think today. If they could only see that I am still going,
Sure.
the grace of the good Lord.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right.
But we have to remember what we're always taught. You don't just give a baby milk, you have to start feeding them too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, you can't just throw somebody on milk.
Right.
Or the word, they have to get the meat.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I do too. I like meat and potatoes. I could just go on meat and potatoes. I mean that I do fine on that.
Derby just south of Wichita.
Just about south, I think. Yeah, just about. Yeah, yeah. Just like, well, if you go east, and then there's a lot of Antioch churches too. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. There's no trees in West Texas, and there's no trees in Tarzan.
I'm from Kansas, and I used to have to hear all these flat land jokes, and then I went to Lubbock, and I'm like, y'all have no idea.
No idea. Right. Mm-hmm. What's that song? Lubbock looks good in the rearview mirror. Mm. Yeah, it's dry. Yeah. Any other comments? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Wayne, would you dismiss us, please?